spotlight on New Zealand. Tonight we focus on one of New Zealand's greatest tragedies, the sinking of the Wahine. Throughout tonight's show, we'll try and find out as much as possible about the disaster so we as a nation can begin to understand this terrible tragedy.
On the morning of the 19th of April 1968, after an overnight voyage from Lyttelton, the ferry Wahine encountered the worst of a violent southerly storm, with winds gusting 160 kilometres per hour. While entering the Wellington harbour, with passengers terrified and feeling very ill indeed, the captain and his crew attempted to keep their ship back on course and out of danger. After many hours, the passengers and crew abandoned ship and were flung out into the rough seas of the harbour in life rafts. They had to make the dangerous crossing to Wellington's rocky shores, where they were met by local Wellingtonians desperate to help. These rescuers could see the state of the harbour and knew it was difficult, and they thought that they probably realised before the others did. We are lucky enough to have recovered footage from back in 1968 of a resident in the seaside village of Eastbourne. They were among the most heroic rescuers on that fateful day. Here's Wellington correspondent Imelda with her 1968 report.
Hello, I'm Melda, and here we have Fodel, a very brave and heroic rescuer. Thank you for joining us today. You must be exhausted. So, who did you rescue, and why did you do it?
Well, he was an old man trapped under a capsized, sinking lifeboat.
And, Isabella, how did you feel after you rescued the person that you did?
Well, very good, and, well, it's a lovely feeling. I can't describe it.
And, Fodel, how did you do this? What happened? Tell me.
Well, there was a dinghy floating in shallow water. I just jumped in, drifted out. The old man swam up, clambered in, and lay gasping on the floor of the boat.
And Isabella, what did you feel before all this happened, when the storm actually started?
Well, it's not very nice, if you know what I mean. Like, you think, well, what are we going to do?
Yes. Well, thank you. Signing off on this, a very bleak day in New Zealand's history.
An interesting interview. Our thanks to Imelda for sending us that old report. Those unfortunate enough to be on the Wahine on the 10th of April 1968 had to deal with a very rough sea night and day. Many passengers were throwing up continuously on these extremely rough seas. The passengers were all told that the storm would pass and to hold on tight. Most thought it was a typical Wellington southerly storm, and that the Wahine would ride it out. Unfortunately, at 6:41 a.m., the Wahine was carried into the rocks of Barrier Reef, sustaining serious damage to the length of her hull. The starboard, that's right to us landlubbers, and the port, that's left, engines both stopped working. Anchors were dropped, but it was some time before they held firm. Rescue attempts were made impossible by the raging gales and massive swells. By early afternoon, all 734 passengers and crew were ordered to abandon ship and get into their life rafts. Only 4 out of 8 rafts could be used because of the steep angle of the now sinking ship. Only 734 people on the ship managed to escape, but due to the stormy seas, 51 lost their lives. We can only imagine what those giant waves looked like to those people in their small life rafts, or worse, for those who had capsized. Our film techniques have found some much damaged footage of two survivors filmed in a civil defence shelter on the hours after the disaster. We have carefully cleaned and restored the film, but this is the first time it has been shown to the New Zealand public. Let's roll the footage now.
How are you? Are you okay? Oh gosh. Are you warm enough? Okay. Are we rolling? Right. I'm Bede, and joining me now is a survivor of today's disaster. How was the cyclone when you were on the ship?
It was very windy.
What do you think the other people in the ship were thinking?
It was very devastating for them, probably.
Did you lose anything while you were on board?
Yes, I lost my sunglasses and my cane and my luggage.
What did you see around you?
Running people and crying also.
Well, thank you. Now we're out of time. Get this old man a hot drink.
And now, let us look at human error being the possible reason for the sinking of the Wahine. Captain Hector Gordon Robertson had been master of the ill-fated ferry for some time. He had sailed her to and from Wellington numerous times in strong winds and high seas, and was an experienced captain. It was Captain Robertson's decision to enter the harbour when they did. They had arrived 20 minutes behind schedule when freak gusts of 100 knots or more struck the vessel and put them out of line. He was quoted at the time as saying, "If those winds had struck 5 minutes later, we would have been through the entrance and could have come down the harbour. We could have come down and dropped anchor in Oriental Bay, where it was quite calm." Some people suggested that Captain Robertson was too late in his decision to put the passengers into the life rafts. They have suggested they should have been evacuated much earlier. Captain Robertson, however, feels he made the right decision, saying, "People who say that don't know what they're talking about. If I had put them off any earlier, everyone would have been lost. I would have had 600 lives on my conscience." In a moment, we will take a closer look at the weather on that fateful day, but now let's look at an interview given by Danica in 1972. This interview may give us some insight as to what was happening on the bridge that day.
Hello, I'm Danica, and joining me now is Captain Robertson and crew member Kimberly. How did the passengers feel when the cyclone happened?
Well, they felt terrified, and some of them were waking up and didn't realize what had happened.
What did you do when you knew the boat was sinking?
I rushed to help the passengers.
Okay. Were you the last person to leave the boat?
Well, yes, I was, and that's what a captain does.
Would you go back to the sea again?
No, not at the moment, but perhaps in 2 years when the memory has faded.
How about you, Kim?
No, of course, this was a terrible disaster.
Thanks for your time, crew member and captain. Salute.
Let's look at the weather. On the 10th of April 1968, it certainly was a terrible day to be stuck outside in New Zealand.
Here's the weather from Becky and Samuel.
Cyclone Gazelle was first reported on the 5th of April 1968. when it hit British Caledonia with storm. Warnings issued throughout New Zealand the next day. Early on the 9th of April, Cyclone Gazelle hit Cape Reinga. Winds of up to 160 kilometres an hour caused massive damage to buildings. Torrential rain flooded farmland in Northland, drowning hundreds of farm animals. A farmer was also killed when he was blown off a haystack. The cyclone's pattern of damage continued as it travelled across the North Island but turned south down the east coast. Ships were driven ashore and landslides closed roads. Rain caused massive flooding and wind left roofs torn off and windows broken. By the time Cyclone Gazelle hit Wellington on the morning of the 10th of April, another storm had driven up the west coast of the South Island from Antarctica.
The two storms met over the capital, causing huge damage. Winds in Wellington were the strongest ever recorded. At one point, speeds of 275 kilometres an hour. As the storm moved on to the South Island, hundreds of Christchurch houses lost their roofs, and both the Avon and the Heathcote rivers flooded. Throughout Canterbury, over 500 hectares of forest were destroyed. In Southland, the flooding was the worst since 1913. Some people were stranded on the roofs of their houses and had to be rescued by a jet boat. Cyclone Giselle finally blew out somewhere in the South Ocean. And there you have it, folks. Perhaps if weather forecasting could have been then what it is now.
The Wahine disaster would have never happened.
Back to you
Here in the studio.
Thank you. What an incredible storm it must have been. Well, that's all we have time for this evening. We hope you have learned something about your country's history and about one of our darkest days.
Please join us next week when we focus on the Springbok Tour of 1981. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time. From the whole team at Spotlight on New Zealand, goodbye in Nohora.